Right now we are in a weird space globally with magic mushrooms. Although there are many places where they are outright legal or decriminalized, like Brazil, Portugal, and many areas of the US like Denver, DC, Seattle, and Oregon. One of the messiest battlefields of psilocybin law reform is my home nation of Canada. Psychedelic mushrooms are technically illegal, but try telling the police that, with new magic mushroom dispensaries popping up all the time in major cities. Plus, if you don't want to go out to buy your mushrooms, just get Canada Post to deliver them to your door. Magic mushrooms in Canada are available medically, but it seems like you almost need to be dying to get access to them. There's even publicly traded companies that have their profits tied up in some way with magic mushrooms. To me, it seems like magic mushrooms are at a similar place to where we were in 2018 when Canada legalized cannabis. I decided to look into this more and talk to two people who have been battling for psilocybin drug reform, one doing it above the board with Health Canada, and one doing it through active civil disobedience.
Been an activist for cannabis and psychedelic and drug law reform for the last 35 years or so. These days, among other things, I run the Medicinal Mushroom Dispensary, which has 3 locations in Vancouver, and we're the world's only shop that sells not only psychedelic mushrooms, but also LSD, DMT, some other more esoteric psychedelics. Tried a lot of different avenues in pursuing drug policy reform. I've run for political office. I founded a couple of political parties. I've worked with mainstream political parties. I've put on large protests and events, and all these things have their place, but I really find that direct civil disobedience and this kind of retail activism that we do, I think is very effective. Because on the one hand, simply selling these substances openly is itself revolutionary and changing for a lot of people's lives and creating the kind of reality we want to be in, where these things are sold in a responsible manner to adults. And also the revenue you generate from this kind of business, I can then turn around and put back into further activism. And so for us, among other things, we run the Get Your Drugs Tested program, which is a free street analysis, a walk-in drug testing service. We've become the busiest free street drug analysis center in the world, approaching 70,000 substances tested. So for me, it all works very synergistically together, having a retail business that is itself revolutionary and using those funds to do other kinds of activism that doesn't make money, but that needs to be done. I find that's a really powerful combination.
I've been a psychotherapist in Victoria, BC for almost 50 years. My interest in psychedelics was always there, but working with Health Canada and with a school district, I kind of let that interest go dormant for several decades. I met a woman who she had had psychological problems for a long time, including alcohol addiction, and had suffered severe depression for a long time. And she had tried many therapists, psychiatrists, many different kinds of doctor-prescribed pills. None of this had done her any good. Well, this was just about the time that research was beginning at UCLA with Dr. Charlie Grobe, who had just come out with a paper indicating how psilocybin was very beneficial for the treatment of anxiety. And at that time, the main focus in terms of patients, it was around the area of what was called end-of-life distress. And that's the depression, the anxiety, the demoralization that occurs for a person when they've been given a terminal diagnosis. She was also suffering from cancer at the time. So she'd seen some early magazine articles about this budding research, was very interested because she was desperate at this point. She'd tried virtually everything that was available, and she was highly motivated to get better. She showed dramatic improvement, and that really heartened me. There had been a fair bit of underground psychedelic therapy going on, well, since the mid-60s, but I would like to see this legal. And so it's paradoxical that right at the time that I retired from my 35-year career at that point, I decided that my next goal was to make psilocybin psychotherapy available to any patient in Canada who required it.
Yeah, I've kind of committed my life to dismantling the whole war on drugs, really. And we started with cannabis because I figure if you can't get that legalized, then you're not going to have much success getting the scarier and more controversial substances. Laws changed around that. And of course, when we started that back in the 90s, public opinion was against legalization for the most part. And a majority of Canadians saw cannabis as dangerous and harmful and bad for kids. And we got to keep the stuff criminalized to save our society. And now a majority of Canadians support legalization and are happy the laws have changed. And when it comes to psychedelics, they have an incredible array of benefits, psychologically and physically, for a lot of people. You know, we serve over 100 people here every day, and I hear every day from people whose lives are changed for the better by access to these substances. And we're still kind of unraveling all the benefits and ways that they work and everything. And one of those is helping people deal with addictive and harmful behaviors and increasing your personal understanding of yourself, and maybe untangling for yourself the motivations that you have for some of the behaviors that you don't like or that are causing problems in your life. And you know, whether or not you've got those kind of issues, I think everybody's dealing with some kind of trauma, some kind of problems, some more severe than others. We've all got our burdens and our things in life and our scars, and psychedelics help people to understand those things, to integrate those things.
There were two landmark research papers that came out in December of 2016, one from Johns Hopkins, one from New York University. And the interesting thing about these papers was that they agreed with one another to a very high extent, showing real gains in the treatment of anxiety and depression, reduction of demoralization, increase of optimism and quality of life. And for many of those patients, part of the healing process was the opening of a spiritual dimension in their life that hadn't really been there previously.
And that with psychedelics and mushrooms, instead, the ability to process and reintegrate those kind of experiences and move beyond them. You're not trying to push them aside, not trying to shove them down and ignore them. You're accepting them. You're able to accept and move past these things. And that's a much more of a healing effect than trying to tamp down and push away things. And I'm not sure the chemical process or how that works, but it definitely works. And for a lot of people, this is really transformative, you know?
So in January of 2017, I filed Canada's first formal application to Health Canada for access to psilocybin for medical reasons. And then I spent about the next 3 years going back and forth with correspondence with Health Canada, trying to make the case for there being a legitimate scientific basis to support this treatment, and also a legitimate human need that from our research, we estimated that every year there were at least 2,500 new patients across Canada that would be resistant to conventional pharmacological treatments and that would benefit from psychedelic treatment. But after 3 years back and forth with Health Canada, they finally turned my application down. My response was to assemble a team of lawyers and get ready to take them to court with what's called a constitutional challenge. And that is a challenge which alleges that Canada's drug laws were in violation of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I relied very substantially on what had happened in the courts around the legalization of cannabis. And there were several landmark cases, the first being in the year 2000, where the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the absolute prohibition of cannabis to patients who needed that was in violation of the Charter's affirmation of the right to liberty and security of person. And right about then, they started giving out approvals for applications for individual clients. I'll never forget this date. It was August the 4th of 2020 that we got our first batch of 4 approvals from Health Canada for psilocybin treatment. And on August the 12th, I had the privilege and the joy of delivering Canada's first legal psilocybin session to a guy in Saskatoon by the name of Thomas Hartle. He was Canada's first legal patient. And then following Thomas, I went on to do 6 more of Canada's first patients. I saw changes in those patients that I had never seen in 40 years of conventional psychotherapy. But then things changed a little bit in government, and the minister at the time was uneasy about patients getting access through the exemption process. So they opened up access through Health Canada's, what they call their special access program. And we started to get approvals through SAP, and we continue to do so. We're not getting approvals in the volume that we would like because the SAP process is still a little bit lengthy. It requires a doctor to make the application on the patient's behalf. And that's a great big difference between the Section 56 route to access and SAP. That with the Section 56, the responsibility was on the patient. So the patient would sign a waiver, a consent, saying, I'm doing this on my own decision. My therapist is not talking me into it or recommending or counseling or pushing me in that direction. I take full responsibility for my decision and for the outcome of my decision. With SAP, now the responsibility is on the doctor. And the doctor is responsible for the outcome. So if things do not go well, the doctor is going to bear responsibility. And unfortunately, we're still in a place in history where not many doctors understand the SAP program. Well, there's more and more doctors now that are going through our training programs and getting educated about psychedelic therapy as a way to go, but they're still in the minority. But time is on our side. The major research projects continue to go ahead. We're over a tipping point here. The Canadian public, there's a large majority of people that support medical use of psilocybin. That continues to grow. And we're going to see within the next decade a major revolution in mental health therapy and psychiatry. You know, I began as a lone advocate for access to medical psilocybin, but I began to speak at conferences, have conversations with my professional colleagues, and very quickly a circle of interested people kind of came out around me. And so in September of 2019, I founded a nonprofit humanitarian organization called Therasil, which is short for therapeutic psilocybin. And so we were a patient rights organization. And our primary goal at that time was to advocate on behalf of patients for access to medical psilocybin. We very quickly realized the importance of a training program, because if we're going to have competent therapy here, we need to have well-trained professionals. So for the last 5 years now, Therasil has focused on training psychotherapists in psilocybin psychotherapy.
I think that most people who take mushroom psychedelics, they just take them on their own or with their friends for fun. They have a good time. They have a positive therapeutic experience. I'm not sure you need to have a special place to go, although it depends on the substance. When you're talking about ibogaine or something that, mushrooms last 4 to 5 hours, it can be quite pleasant. It can be challenging too, and it can be emotionally difficult depending what you're doing it for. But, ibogaine can last, I think, 24 hours. It can be a lot more intense. And if you're seeking this because you've got an issue you're trying to deal with, you feel troubled, you're seeking a certain solution or insight into something, then maybe having a guide is more helpful, right? If you're just looking to have a fun time or just want to experiment, it's not always needed, but I think you can get a lot more out of it. I think it's very important work. I'm actually on the verge of opening a place myself. I'm refurbishing a house that I have access to set it up for a safe place so you can come and have somebody there with you or somebody just outside the room, but keeping you safe, where you can try mushrooms or psychedelics or DMT or whatever kind of substances in this kind of safer environment. And so I'm working towards that. But I feel the therapy aspect really comes before and after the experience. While you're in it, I don't think having somebody go, "Hey, tell me about your mom now," or whatever, right, is really the right way to go. But sometimes, I've seen this too, where sometimes a mushroom dose can lead to a depressive state, especially if you're already feeling depressed. I had one person, and this is quite a while ago, and they had depression, and I sold them some mushrooms. This is before I was actually doing the shop, right? So I gave them a mushroom. I said, "Well, try this, but do it. Have somebody else there with you. It's important, especially if you've got depression." And the first time they did, they had a friend there with them. They had an incredibly positive experience, wrote back, big long email, all the changes and insights they got, and how wonderful it was. And then a few months later, now these things aren't necessarily always perfect. What I do find is you'll get this insight and these euphoria and these epiphanies, but then a month or two later, real life is intruding again, and sometimes those feelings can fade, right? And I find microdosing is really good to hold that state, because the microdose, you're not tripping, you're not going to that extreme place again. You can live your life and function and drive your car and work and do everything on microdosing, but you just get a little twinkle of a reminder. And if you've had that bigger experience, you just get a reminder, oh yeah, we're all connected. And oh yeah, I don't gotta freak out all the time. Everyone else is having their own problems. The guy that cut me off, he's probably having a bad day or he's in a hurry. I don't gotta let it eat at me all the rest of my day. I can just let it go, right? And so I find that quite useful. But she messaged me again a few months later, and she tried another mushroom. The second time she did it, she was alone. She was feeling depressed, going into a negative spiral. Thought, well, last time it was so good, I'll take a mushroom now and it'll help me get out of it again. But the opposite happened. Because she was alone, because she was taking it heading into a depressive state, she had a really bad time, got very dark, ended up calling an ambulance, going to the hospital, having all these negative experiences out of it. And in retrospect, she did message me and say, I did find some, even though it was dark and hard, I did find some benefits out of that, going through that dark place. But, having somebody there just to touch you on the shoulder, go, hey, it's okay. That can make a huge difference when you're in the middle of that state, right? And she didn't have that. So there are times, I think, when it is important to have somebody there. That's a perfect example of somebody who definitely would have benefited from better timing and having somebody else there, right? So it is an issue, and especially when you're dealing with those kind of things. But that's why we have user guides. That's why we teach people how to use it properly. That's why we warn them about the risks. The risks can be minor, but they're still there, and they are real. And so, we have user guides in every product: LSD, DMT, mushrooms, everything else. Encouraging, we always give it to people, tell them, make sure you look at this, ask us if you got any questions. I think that helps a lot too. And I do think that a safe place to use is important. And I wish there was more of that. And, we're talking about all this drug treatment stuff for people. I'm not even really sure what drug treatment is. It's kind of a mishmash. And I don't believe to the idea that, oh, we just give all these drug addicts some mushrooms and all their problems are solved. No, we need a safe drug supply, and to recognize that all kinds of drug use are ultimately normal and natural. But at the same time, there is a truth of the fact that people can often get better relationships with these substances from that. They can help them break addictive cycles, help them change their behaviors. And that can be tobacco and alcohol and things like that too. You know, it doesn't always have to be illegal substances, right? But these things can definitely help people psychologically. And I think having a safe place with somebody there to help you through the experience, that can enhance the benefits and reduce the risks even more.
There was a time back in the early 60s where people recognized medicines like LSD and psilocybin to have a lot of clinical potential. And I think it was back in that era that we first started hearing the term magic mushrooms. So the idea that there was something magic about these substances, and if you took these substances, they would do you good. And so I remember back in the 60s, there were people going, well, we should put this stuff in the water supply of major cities and we'd have a transformation on a worldwide kind of basis. What we understand now is that by ingesting one of these psychedelic agents, we can have some tremendous revelations, new insights into ourselves or the meaning of life, or insights into why I'm feeling as bad as I do. But in many cases, those insights kind of evaporate as soon as the session is over. So in the days and the weeks following the session, I start to forget about those insights that were so important and so absolutely clear and real at the time. And what we've learned since the 60s is that the medicine is effective as a therapeutic agent. Its effectiveness has a lot to do with it being placed in the context of an ongoing psychotherapy experience. And the essence of that experience is relational. That is, it involves a relationship between a therapist and a client. And the nature of the psychotherapy experience in the session itself is that it greatly lowers our resistance to looking at things that are painful or uncomfortable to look at. Our psychological defenses come down and the memories come back. We start thinking about those things that we've pushed away for a long time, and they start to come up in a very powerful way, a way that the memories are accompanied by a lot of emotion in some cases. And some of those memories have to do with very difficult or painful situations from our past. If we don't have a relationship of real trust and rapport with our therapist, then we find, well, I'm feeling this stuff. I'm saturated with these feelings and these memories, but I don't trust this person enough to really talk about it with. So it's very important in the psychedelic therapy process that there's enough time spent before the medicine session where we develop as therapists, a really tight bond of trust with our patients. And so preceding the medicine session, we have a series of sessions that we call preparation sessions. This is where, as a therapist, I get to know my patient. I get to know what their issues are. I get to know how much they're hurting. And they're getting to know me. They're getting to know who this guy is. How much can I trust him? How much can I tell him about the really sensitive things going on inside me that I don't share with my friends? In many cases, I don't share them with anyone. Then when they're feeling ready and the therapist is feeling that they're ready for it, we go to the medicine day. With psilocybin, we're thinking in terms of a medicine experience that lasts anywhere from 3.5 hours to 6 hours. And during that session, the patient will be lying down virtually the whole time, usually on their back. They're free to move around. Sometimes they might want to curl up, but they're laying out the whole time, either with their eyes closed or wearing eye shades, and either wearing earphones or using a speaker to listen to a program of music throughout the whole session. So this is a very different approach than most people have experienced with recreational doses of psychedelics. We completely interiorize the experience, and we lead them to relax, to surrender to whatever experiences come up. We say, dance with whoever and whatever shows up, and to just be with and stay with whatever it is. Is it visual images? Is it memories? Is it emotions? Is it sensations in the body? And to just stay with that stuff until it changes. And the wonderful thing about this process is that if we are able to be with and stay with those unpleasant or difficult, and in some cases they can be downright scary or terrifying material, that it does transform into experience that is a lot more satisfying. And so there's a great healing that can happen here when the patient has the courage to face on an emotional level the kind of psychological material that they've been trying to keep at bay, in many cases, for years or decades. We tend to discourage talking through the session itself with psilocybin. Toward the end of the session, the patient, as they're starting to come out, there may be a bit of discussion, but we encourage them to kind of stay with that stuff until the session is over, and then maybe in the evening of that session, we'll have the first of one of what we call integration sessions. And so an integration session is all about taking the material that has come up for the client in the dosing session, and those insights, those breakthroughs in expression of emotion, those, in many cases, there'll be new perspectives, new values emerging. And the challenge is to weave that material from the session into the fabric of their ongoing day-to-day. And so the research studies always had a minimum of 3 preparation sessions and a minimum of 3 integration sessions following the dosing. But we know that in the real world, as opposed to the world of clinical trials, this process fits best into a long-term therapeutic format. That I mean, the longer we can work with the client prior to the medicine session, the greater the likelihood that we have the relationship of trust that will allow the person to open up deeply enough to get down to the material that has been kind of stuck down there for a long time.
The first thing somebody that would be against this would say is, what about the danger of having less control over these substances? What would you say to something like that?
Well, I would first argue that legalization and regulation grants you more control over these substances, not less. If you look at how much control did we have over alcohol during alcohol prohibition, we had no control, and as a result, public drinking increased during alcohol prohibition. The harms from alcohol consumption soared. Quality control was non-existent, so toxic and poison forms of alcohol were widely available on the market. We're seeing the same thing now with the opioid death crisis, which is not an opioid crisis, it's a prohibition crisis, and it's our inability to regulate and control these substances. And so with psychedelics, I mean, there are risks of taking psychedelics, but those risks are all exacerbated in a prohibitionist environment. We're able to give people a guide on how to use it properly. We're able to answer questions. We're able to tell them precisely what the potency is and how much they're going to need to take to get the effect they want, and not take too much or too little, which can produce negative effects sometimes. And so, and I think the best way to mediate and reduce those risks, which are already pretty minimal with psychedelics, right? I mean, there are risks involved, most of which involve irresponsible behavior while you're high, right? So driving or climbing or swimming or things like that, obviously not good ideas to do after taking a psychedelic dose. And we certainly caution people about that. But in terms of toxicity or health effects, mushrooms and psychedelics are really on par with cannabis, where a large dose can make you feel uncomfortable, and quite uncomfortable sometimes after a really big dose, but you're not going to kill yourself regardless of the dosage size, right? Like with cannabis, the amount of mushrooms needed to kill you or cause real serious health hazards is in the kilos of size of amounts, right? It's beyond what any person would normally take, which is 1 to 3 or 4 grams. Ultimately, the more dangerous the substance is, the more you need to legalize and regulate it in some way and control it, right? So, but also there is a harm with mushrooms and people picking their own mushrooms. Sometimes you can get ones that are toxic or be unclear what you're picking. It does happen. People sometimes harm or kill themselves picking mushrooms that they shouldn't have or misjudging what they are. Of course, that won't happen when you buy them at a place like this. And so those are the kind of harms that can be reduced. And partly why we want to get your drugs tested, because, not knowing what you've gotten or buying a substance we don't sell here or other types of drugs, if you don't know what it is, and sometimes we find out people have bought something and it's very different than what they expected it to be, right? So for me, the safe supply out of our store, the safe supply of psychedelics and the Get Your Drugs Tested, it's all about helping users make informed decisions about what they're going to put in their body. And when given the option, people want to make responsible decisions. That's just how we are.
For many people who have a psychedelic experience, they find that there's what they refer to as a spiritual dimension that opens up, where they're able to focus on and find satisfying answers to questions like, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of my life? What's the meaning of my suffering and my death and my love? And what is it that makes life worth living? What it was of profound interest to me was one of the Hopkins studies that showed that the people who had the spiritual experiences, and in the literature they're referred to as mystical type experiences, but the people that had the mystical type experiences tended to be the ones that had the best clinical outcomes for their presenting problems of anxiety, depression, and so on. And when it comes to, say, PTSD, well, the thinking around PTSD is, I have a traumatic event happen to me in my early life, and it's like that event stays with me as I move forward, and that traumatic event casts a kind of a shadow over my future, diminishing my sense of self-worth, my sense of control over my life, my sense of ability to like and love myself, my ability to connect with others. And so if trauma is untreated, those deficits are something I carry with me through the rest of my life. I mean, we routinely work with people who have been carrying trauma for 30, 40, 50 years. And they've been under a kind of a bondage. They've been under that cloud. What we're finding with psychedelics is that administered under the right circumstances and in a context of safety and trust and follow-up conversation to help the client make sense of what's happened for them, we find that instead of a cloud over their future, it's like a sunbeam that's now over their future. And as they go forward in this world, they're more resistant to demoralization and depression. And that seems especially important at this place we are in history right now. I mean, with things like climate change, with global warming, with environmental destruction, with population issues, with the prospect of serious war, this planet can be a fairly depressing place for a lot of people. And I'm finding with many clients, and this is true for myself, that I just have a lot more optimism about life and our ability to move through this trying period in human history and come out the other side in a better place.
What have been some of the response from the public about this store, the positive side, and have you had pushback as well?
Yeah, public reaction by and large has been very positive. You know, there are some naysayers, but very minor compared to the numbers that are positive of what we're doing. I don't just mean our customers either. I just mean if I see a news report or if I'm in the media and I read the comments, you know, there's some comments that are like, oh, we need is more drugs in our society and drugs, and they're all bad. And you know, I think that the word drugs I really don't like because it covers such a broad spectrum of things, from pharmaceutical substances to coffee to, you know, we treat coca leaf and cocaine the same, and although they're on a continuum, they're way far apart on that continuum, right? And you know, certainly psychedelics, I mean, the risks of use of these things is very different than the risk of opiates or the risk of stimulants. And so I'm not a big prohibitionist. I don't want to be like a drug exceptionalist, or my drug is better than your drug and your drug is bad, my drug is good. I don't believe in that. But I do think there are inherent risks and benefits of different substances, and that although I think everything should be legal, it doesn't mean everything should be equally available or regulated in the same way, right? I mean, a lot of different things are legal. A lot of prescription drugs are legal, but you can't buy them in the store. You know, other things are legal and they're widely available in everywhere, right? And so there's all different kinds of rules what legality means, but I think we got to rethink the whole concept of drug prohibition, a policy which was brought into place over 100 years ago, a time where the social values and the mores and the perceptions and society was very different than it was now. And many of the viewpoints and attitudes of that time we now reject and feel we've moved beyond. And if you expressed views that were very commonplace at that time, you would now be considered a dinosaur and out of step, and that you're not in touch. And I think that's good, right? But when it comes to drug policy and drug laws, the same attitudes and the same laws have been in place this whole time. And, you know, our current drug laws were all based on ignorance and bigotry and racism and nonsense and misinformation. And anybody kind of knows that. But there's this idea now that even though these laws started out that way, they've somehow gotten better, or they're based in different things, but they're not. They're all rooted in the same kind of issues. The biggest pushback we've had was the police raid last year in November, right? That was pretty devastating. Took us several months to recover from that. Police came in, stormed all the locations. We have 3 spots. took all of our money, all of our mushrooms, all of our psychedelics and coca leaf and everything else. And they don't really tell you why they're raiding you either. I mean, maybe it seems obvious we sell all these illegal substances, but I'm not the only mushroom dispensary in town. There's at least 20 others operating. None of them have been raided at all. And I think the raid was probably came out of the coca leaf of sales. I'm pretty sure that was what pushed us over the top, because incredibly, our law considers coca leaf a Schedule I drug next to cocaine. You know, the police coming in and taking your stuff, that's the biggest pushback that you get. Hopefully it won't happen again anytime soon, but that was after 3 years of being open. So one raid every 3 years, you know, we could live with that.
What do you think about the use of psychedelics with people that have relatively mild issues in their life?
So the research really began by focusing on end-of-life distress. I think that may have partly been because, well, these people are about to die. Worries about long-term negative effects don't really apply to them at all. But the essence of end-of-life distress is anxiety, depression, and demoralization. But now, Theracell is partnering with an organization in Eastern Canada where we are beginning to study the effect of psilocybin not in the treatment of those formal mental disorders, but on wellness. That is the idea that a large percentage of the population who doesn't suffer from any mental diagnosis can benefit in terms of increasing their sense of wellness.
How would you suggest somebody that's new to psilocybin experience it?
1 gram of golden teacher, 1 to 2 grams of golden teacher, really. Golden teacher strain, it's a great introductory strain. Just like with cannabis, there's all different kinds of mushrooms. They're all kind of related and have similar effects, but also they're quite different as well in some ways, right? Just like with cannabis, you got some, indica and sativa, but you've also got different subcategories and different varieties. So golden teacher is a very therapeutic variety. We sell a ton of it. It's the cheapest one on our menu. And if you come in first time, I've never tried mushrooms before, I'm a little nervous, I want to try some, we recommend golden teacher. And 1 gram or 2 is a fine starter dose. You're going to have a positive experience. If you're nervous, have a friend with you who's not tripping or who has tried it before maybe, just to give you a touch and a hug and a kind word if you need it, or a cup of water, or drive you somewhere or whatever, hold your hand while you go for a walk in the woods, or just to be around, keep you safe and keep you in a good mental state, right? But a small dose, you don't need to do heroic dosages. For most people, 1 to 3 grams of mushrooms is a fine dose. For most people, over 5 grams, you're getting into pretty what they call heroic dose, although you don't got to be a hero. It's not really heroic. It's just a giant dose, right? And for most people, that's too much. But that being said, for some people, that's a fine amount too, right? But for a starter, for most people, a smaller amount is fine. And you're going to have a great time. You're going to have a pleasant time, and you're going to find you're going to feel better afterwards. Whatever the issues you're dealing with, you're more than likely going to feel a lot better about things. You're going to feel more positive, more focused, and more in touch with yourself, more forgiving, more accepting, and those are all positive things. And so that's kind of what we would tell somebody who comes in for the first time looking for that kind of experience.
What is your opinion on the underground scene of people doing what they refer to as ceremonies, mushroom ceremonies, this kind of stuff? If you could maybe just share what your opinion is.
Well, I've got to say, I feel ambivalent about a lot of what goes on underground. Not all of it. I mean, there are some highly trained therapists who do some very, very good underground work. There are some therapists who have not had formal training who are doing very good underground work. And there are also therapists who are doing extremely incompetent and even dangerous and destructive work. We need to understand that many people seek psychedelic therapy because they've exhausted their hope that any conventional treatment will work for them. So for those people, by the time they get to psychedelic therapy, they are in many cases, desperate. And when people are desperate, they're more vulnerable. And they're vulnerable to people who would take advantage of them. And just as we understand around issues like sexual abuse, abusers and predators go to where the vulnerable people are. To make matters worse, not only is there injury there, but the patient has no recourse to a disciplinary body that can deal with a therapist. And so we insist that our trainees are part of a professional organization that has a code of ethics, a disciplinary body, and disciplinary measures that can punish a therapist who violates their code of ethics. We've got a beautiful new therapeutic model emerging with new protocols and practices that can change the face of mental health in Canada. And it's very distressing to worry that the misbehavior of unethical therapists can jeopardize all the good that is coming from both the scientific research and the good work that good therapists are doing.
What do you see going into the future of psychedelics, and what is your kind of hopes for the future of psychedelics?
Well, I predict in Canada anyway, it's going to follow the same path cannabis did, and partly because that's the path we're working down, right? You know, we went from 1 or 2 above ground medicinal cannabis dispensaries in Canada in the 90s to a few dozen in the early 2000s to over 100 in Vancouver and hundreds more across Canada pre-legalization. And I really believe that it was this proliferation and normalization of open cannabis sales pre-legalization that was a necessary prerequisite to get to the law changing. You need this kind of widespread civil disobedience and disrespect for the law. And for those who aren't paying attention, they go, aren't they illegal already? There's 6 shops within 5 blocks of me. How is this not already legal? I don't understand, right? So, and then making it legal, they go, well, I thought it already was legal, right? So I think you need that kind of process. The same thing's going to happen with these mushroom dispensaries, right? There used to be 2 or 3 in the city. Now there's over 20. There's more to come. I'm the only one that's been raided. So the rest of them go, well, we just don't sell coca leaves. Don't be mouthy like Dana is. And they're probably fine, right? Other cities have got them too. Toronto, there's a lot opening. They do raid them in Toronto. They don't accomplish anything either, except a lot of police money wasted. But these guys are coming to every city and town across Canada. It's going to take a few years. I don't think the law is going to change, other than maybe court decisions pushing the law forward. But in terms of legislative change and legalization, I think it's going to happen the next Liberal government after the current one. So whoever, if Trudeau wins the next election, or if Poilievre wins the next election, it'll be the next Liberal government after that, right? Because they did cannabis already. Trudeau's got a lot of hassles on drugs and decriminalization and everything else. I don't think they've got the mood right now to try to legalize psychedelics. And we need time to build the momentum, right? We're not strong enough yet. We're getting there, right? But having 20 shops in Vancouver is not enough. You need 100 shops in Vancouver for city council to pick up and pay attention, right? The one councillor was saying, oh, these places are probably hiding and you won't know what the store is till you walk in. It's like, no, you go to Google Mushroom Dispensary Vancouver, and they all show up on the map, right? There's no hiding. I mean, they're all very obvious and blatantly there, which is good. They should be, right? But I think this is going to take more time. We need more critical mass, and we're not there yet. It took a lot for cannabis. It took widespread support for legalization. So there was hundreds and hundreds of shops across Canada, many, many court decisions in our favor, and we're building the number of shops, we're building public opinion, we're building valid, helpful court decisions, but we're just not there yet. And so I think it's going to be, at least 5 to 10 years, I would say, before the law changes. That's just a guess, obviously, but I think it's at least that long. But in that time, we're going to see hundreds of shops opening. We're going to see more court decisions, making it harder for the police and the courts to arrest and incarcerate people for this, because the courts are going to keep backing up the medicinal benefits. It's like it was with cannabis. The medicinal benefits are very helpful. So that's where I see the future going on this. I think it's not inevitable because there's a lot of work and time and energy involved, but if the current trajectories continue, then it's inevitable we're going to see legalization of psychedelics within the next 10 years, I would say.
I think that the interest on the part of the medical community is going to continue to go forward. I'm going to be holding my 5th training seminar in about 2 weeks. I've got 2 general practice doctors in there and 2 psychiatrists. We're going to see more interest that way. We're going to see further research branching out to applying psilocybin to other kinds of difficulties. We're probably going to see expensive, high-end kind of therapeutic psychedelic spas. But my desire right from the very beginning, my goal is that psychedelic therapy is accessible to any Canadian who has need of it.